Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Cherwell Advanced Practitioner call. We have quite a few people that are in the middle of dialing in, so we're going to wait just a minute or two more, and then we'll get going with our presentation today.
Laura, do you see the slideshow right now?
Give me just 1 second. Yeah, I do.
Excellent.
Okay, we're a couple of minutes past the hour, so I think we can go ahead and get going while everyone else is dialing in and get connected to audio. So welcome everyone to our Cherwell Advanced Practitioner Forum. We ran quite a few of these calls in 2017, and really the purpose of these calls is to get some detailed technical information out to you. If you're new and you're a beginner, feel free to ask lots of questions, but these are very technical in nature, so hopefully they'll provide some very good information for you and your team. We hope to run them as monthly as we can all year. Occasionally we miss a month, but we're hoping to make them regular throughout the rest of the year. Thank you for joining us. A little history on Stratacom, if you're not familiar. Stratacom was founded in '97 as an IT service management consulting company. We've worked primarily with enterprise-level solutions and clients over the last 20 years, and we made a move into Cherwell about 6 or 7 years ago. We were one of the early partners on, and currently about 80% of our practice focuses on providing professional services around Cherwell software. So at any point in the future, if we can be of assistance, please reach out to us at any time. With that, I'm going to move things over to Greg Gerton. He's our senior Cherwell consultant who's going to be walking through today. From what I understand, I believe Greg has 3 different topics. So at the end of each of the topics of advanced tips and tricks, I'm going to allow a Q&A session. And anytime you're welcome to jump in with questions. To answer questions, or excuse me, to ask questions, you should see a questions panel. If you don't see it, try to find a orange box with a white arrow. If you click that, that should expand all your panels, and you should see a questions pane there. So I can interrupt Greg as we're going with questions you may have as we're going along, and then we'll allow for a more formal Q&A at the end of each topic as well. So Greg, I would like to pause for one quick moment. Our go-to meeting was updated yesterday, and I'm having trouble finding the option to record. Okay, it looks like we're recording, so we're good to go. With that, I'm going to turn over to Greg, and he's going to dive into our topics for the day.
Hi, thank you, Laura. So like Laura said, my name is Greg Gerton. I'm one of the senior consultants here with Stratacom. I've been working with Cherwell for I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years now. I'm not even entirely sure anymore. All kinds of blends together, right? So today we're going to kind of walk through a couple of more of advanced, or not necessarily even so much advanced, but technical tricks to consider as you're going through and configuring your environment. They could be additions after the fact, additional modules that are maybe added as new phases, tweaks to existing. There's a lot of different use cases for what we're going to talk about today. So the first topic that I want to go through is going to be portal design. So this is one thing that it seems to be really popular among all implementations right now, is the portal, and kind of coming up with a best scenario for how to implement that portal based on the customer. Now, every customer is a little bit different. The information that they want to display is a little bit different, but the overall concepts of how to do it are usually very similar. So we'll talk about designing the portal for the end user and not for IT, user-based categorization, and then communication. Those are the three big must-haves that I've found personally when going through a portal implementation. So for the first one, designing for the end user and not IT. So what does that really mean? And in the end, we have to remember that as IT people, something may seem very simple for us, but it's not for maybe somebody who's not as IT related. I mean, everybody probably knows someone who struggles with a smartphone or has trouble with their laptop, and some people, even though they may have to be in the IT world, are not IT people. And those are the people we have to really think about as we're going through and designing this portal. Not that we're designing it entirely just for them, but we need to make sure that it's user-friendly enough that somebody who doesn't have any training in the tool can walk through what you need to gather the information that you need from them. So the first is just making it as simple that you can to walk through. And what I've found for making it simple is concentrating on three main options and presenting that to the user on the main landing page. So what I like to do is personally have three buttons: a new incident report outage, service catalog, and my ticket status. And I like to take those three buttons and put them front and center. I've had great success with this in many different organizations. And I think that those three key features are the ones that you want to draw attention to on the ticket. I like
I have a question that just popped.
Yep.
Would you suggest small pilot user groups to help with designing for the user and not for IT?
I would. In fact, if the project allows for that from a timeline perspective or from a user perspective, if you guys have the staff to allow for that, I think that can greatly increase your odds of success. So yes, I do recommend that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So back to the three main buttons on the landing page, and I want to draw attention to those three buttons. I want those to be the focus of the tool, and then I also will often add a couple of others based on the company or the use case for the company around those buttons. And you can see I've got those listed as major incidents is a big one. But I don't usually like to draw attention to them per se. I don't want people to think there's always major incidents. So I know a lot of times there's requests for tickers and things like that to walk through and show those major incidents and try and prevent, well, not really prevent, but try to make people aware of an incident before they submit a ticket. And that is a good case. So what I like to do with major incidents is maybe put it as a smaller icon in the bottom left or the bottom right corner of the page. With like a exclamation or something red that kind of draws attention to that's something that's currently broken. We're aware of it, we know of it, and that might be something that you're experiencing right now. Password reset is another common thing to have on the portal form. That's typically a menu item, so it's not something that displays right on the page. And then I like to also have a frequently asked questions. And I would do the same thing as major incident with frequently asked questions, kind of put that as an icon in a corner somewhere. But the nice thing with that frequently asked questions is I usually would pop that to another dashboard, and that can be questions and or another one that's really popular is like a top 10. Yes, the slide deck will be available later. I'll get that to Laura and I can come out. But another popular is just that top 10. It seems to be something where people like to say, hey, what services do we use frequently, things like that, or the most commonly used, and have those displayed. So I think that those, from a simplicity standpoint, now you've really limited what's in front of the end user. It's not as complex. I do like to use images and themes to try and theme everything from a background perspective and make everything really kind of come together as a website. But you need to be careful with the images that you pick, not to draw attention away from those buttons or not to make it difficult to see those buttons. Sometimes people pick like a really flashy image, and it can look good from a web design aspect, but sometimes a usability aspect suffers. So I try to be a little bit careful with that as well. The goals, again, is to drive people to where they're going as quickly as possible. And in doing that, sometimes it will have a very simple look. So some people think it needs to be complex or built out in another manner. We want to have URLs all over the place, or a page that lists 20 services, and all of those things. I mean, if those are the only things you're going to show and you're only going to have a small list of services, maybe it makes sense to have it as one page. But if you have anything that's a large list, I think it draws attention, and then you have to walk through many steps, and you start to run into user adoption issues. So I really think that having a button for service catalog and then displaying those services is a good idea. I think having the button for reporting an incident right up front, maybe an icon that kind of displays something is broken, a really good idea. And then everybody needs to know where to go to see an update on a status, or if they want to provide an update, how many times do you see, oh, the issue's fixed now, and you want them to be able to update that ticket so that the technician can get that update and close the ticket as quickly as possible. The next step for the portal design that I always want to make sure that I cover with everybody is user-based categorization. So in that, I know I've seen it. I used to think that it was out of box, but I know that we've gone through and just kind of added fields now to edit it. You can rename the service, the category, and the subcategory for a user-friendly name and display that to the end user through the service catalog, going through the service catalog options on the widget. What I like to do is make sure that we have internally, a lot of times when you build your categorization, you have a technical name. I want to make sure that whatever the name is that the user knows the product as is what's displayed to the end user in the catalog. So we want to make sure that the naming is done in a manner that the end user knows what they're looking for. The other thing is it needs to be intuitive enough for somebody to walk through it quickly. So we don't need to display services that the end user aren't going to be submitting. So we want to make sure that visible to portal checkbox is only checked for the ones that we know people are going to be using. And we want to make sure that the buckets are big enough with your services when you design your catalog, that the buckets are big enough that they can see which bucket they're going to of the parent services, and then walk through the categorization structure quickly and intuitively. The last one, and possibly the most important that I've found, I learned this actually with a customer probably 6 years ago on another tool, is communication. And I mean, it seems simple enough, but it's something that I now, as a consultant, push on every customer I work with, and that's making sure that you're getting the communication out to the users that are going to be using the tool. You have two options that I see personally for user adoption. The first is someone high up demands that the tool is used and disables all other methods. The CEO says, we're not using anything else, you have to use this, this is your job, or you're fired. Most companies aren't necessarily that direct, even though maybe they should be, but most of them usually aren't. And then we run into the second option, which is we have to convince the end users that the portal will make their lives easier and provide a benefit to them. So, and this is where I think the communication really comes in, is it gives you a way to communicate what's new with the tool, what options or advantages they have to using the tool, how it will benefit them, how it could increase the response time that they're going to get from the users. And those types of things are all a huge benefit going through the communication. I think I've seen things from weekly email blasts to the users for the month prior to go live, and I think that works great. I've also seen people just do one or two of them, and then maybe a kickoff training if possible. Sometimes the end user base is so large with a portal that there's no option for a training, or maybe you can record a training and they can view it later. But a kickoff training is also another great tool to use if possible. I saw another question come in. Tips on creating.
You want me to read them off?
I can actually read them. I've got them here in front of me here. So this is a good time. This is the end of the portal design piece. So a good time for any questions that came up on portal design and then I'll jump into the next one, which, all right, so the first one, hi, any tips about how to create a good catalog, how to handle 300 plus subcategories? Thanks. So 300 subcategories isn't that big of a deal. That's actually fairly easy to manage. The ones that the way I would look at that is services and categories. I try to limit the services to 10 and under. I'd love to see it even less, but again, I think 10 and under, if you're looking for a number to try and strive for, is a good one to try and get. So I would try to, push for the 10 services or under. And then as far as what categories show under those services, that's really driven by what you do as a company, and the number of subcategories you have as a whole, again, is really limited as to what is displayed once you've walked through the service category, subcategory. I know that there are different ways to present the data to everybody. I really like to personally, I like to drive through each step. I know some people will try to limit clicks, but I try to limit the information that's presented to the user. I feel like it's more wizard-like if I have to click a service and then click a category and then find my subcategory from a much smaller list. And I've seen good success with that. I know some people will disagree. Some customers want to go a different route and display everything on one page. But then if you get to 300 links on one page, that just gets to be a bit excessive. I'm gonna skip through 2 questions and come back to them. This one that just came in is a good one. Do end users actually know what a service catalog is? Can they differentiate between an incident and a request? And should incident choices be made available in the service catalog as well as requests? Very good one there. So do end users know what a service catalog is? Possibly, but everybody knows what Amazon is. Everybody knows what a service cart maybe is. So I don't get too hung up on that aspect of it. Maybe you could relabel it as browse catalog instead of service catalog, and that might kind of spark a little bit more depending on what you do as a customer. Can they differentiate between an incident and a request? I don't give them the option. I would categorize them that way. I don't ask them if it's an incident or a request. My thought is report an outage is a incident, and that's only if something's broken. The idea is to just report an outage or report an incident, and then everything else goes to the catalog. So again, I think that's a categorization design. And then should incident choices be made available in the service catalog as well as requests? I kind of answered that with the previous one. Yes, I would allow them to be there. Whether or not they need to be there is kind of up to you. But I would say there's no reason to prevent them, and I would do it based on the categorization. So now I'm going to jump back. We have live demos, 6 laptops set up, and encouraged users to go through the process of submitting incidents and service requests, gave us a bunch of input further into the portal. I think that's more of a statement. So yeah, I do think that live process is a great process to try and go through if possible, and if you have the people to do it. What are your feelings about providing a feedback button on your portal to allow feedback? I think I don't have a problem with a feedback button. I would just make sure that it's as, I would make it maybe minimal, and then in a corner, kind of similar to what I said with the frequently asked questions and the major incidents. I'd probably have it somewhere, not drawing attention to it. I don't see a reason not to get feedback if that's the way that you want to collect feedback. I think it's important to get feedback. The question is just how you decide as a company you want that feedback. Do you want to have the feedback through the portal there, or do you want to have maybe like this live questions and answers, or maybe any other process that you could come up with? Recommendation on offering service and category only and not identify subcategory. I have seen customers do that. If what you're offering is minimal enough that you can get away with that, that's a possibility. I like to group the services in a manner that I think usually I would at least have a service, a parent group, then the categorization, say the application or whatever it is you're working with, and then determining whether or not it's an incident versus a request. I usually have, is something broken? Am I requesting something new? So I think typically it does justify all three, but I have seen customers go to only two if that's something you really want to do. Do you believe that analysis of wording in tickets incoming from the field is helpful to provide you with wording for your service catalog? If so, how has your company or you experienced, analyzed this data and come up with this information? I don't know. So it can be helpful. All information is helpful, right? You should never walk away from information. However, I don't know that I would go off of the wording that the end users submit in the ticket as a justification for how I want to present the wording to them. I think the wording has to be in a manner that they understand, and I mentioned that, and that they know what they're looking for. But sometimes when they're coming through and creating the ticket, I don't think they necessarily probably come up with the best statements for what's broken or what's going on. So I don't know how much validity I would put into all of that data. Maybe after you have a catalog, as tickets come in, you might be able to tweak it based on that. You may see that there's a missing service or a missing categorization somewhere, and I would probably use that as an ongoing analysis of the catalog. We definitely need to have reports that run on a catalog to determine how often it's used or which items are used. You don't, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to display a bunch of information that's not being used. So if you find that you're offering services on your service catalog that aren't being used, you want to have a review process similar to like a knowledge article review that goes through and determines maybe if something should be retired or pulled from the catalog. Do you recommend including the change calendar on the portal if the people that you're targeting on your portal have anything to do with change? Yes. If they don't, I really don't. Great communication technique that works best to convince users for use of the portal. I would go back to that email blasts. How do you have people select a classification beyond your report an incident button? So that's another good question. As a customer, you need to decide if you want them to select a classification. Most people or most customers that I've worked with recently don't want their end users specifying it. I think it follows more of an ITIL process. You want them to specify an impact and urgency to determine the priority. I've noticed a lot of my latest customers have gone away from that and just provided a description for the report and issue, and then generally classified those tickets as threes. It's not necessarily the ITIL standard, but it's a quick and easy method, and it removes the ability for the customer to make everything a one, right? So as far as how they can select their classification, if you allow them to select a classification, I would do impact and urgency and try not to tell them it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3. I would try to word it in a manner that they hopefully classify it correctly. When not sure, we used generic submit incident or submit request for pilots, and we take those to figure out what types of issues are commonly reported and what services. Okay, so for starting out, you're using that to gather the information. That makes sense. Service classification, how do you know how to route those incidents? Then subcategory. Yeah, we will actually cover that in a little bit. That's one of the topics we'll talk about later. But yeah, I would do that through the subcategory. Hopefully that's what you were asking. So it looks like most of those have come in. If we don't have any others, I'm gonna jump into the next topic, and we can always come back if anybody has anything else at the end, and we can do a whole roundtable with everybody of any other questions. So the next topic I wanted to talk about was map versus blueprint. It is amazing how many people can differ on this. We have differences just within our own company based on the consultants that are doing implementations. I think everybody has a different opinion. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. So I'm gonna kind of go through everything here quick and pros and cons of each. And I'll mention my opinion, but again, I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong. I think it just depends. So what is a map? A map is that mergeable application. And I think everybody sees the benefits of that from Cherwell. The key benefit, I think, personally to a map is the ability to build code and share that to multiple environments. So the idea is it doesn't have to be on your dev, test, and QA. You could give it to somebody else and they can put it in their dev, test, and QA. I think that's the strong suit of a map. And we'll kind of just run through. I did skip a slide, I'm sorry. So the topics are what are a map, what is a blueprint, and is there a right answer? So the map, again, I think that's about for moving code from one system to another system. And in my thoughts, that's not necessarily the same system. You're able to merge it into another environment. So the key features there is allowing those merge options while applying a map. And during that process, you can choose whether or not you have a certain interaction level, those merge actions, how you're going to apply it, or maybe just apply certain features, not the whole map, and then a summary of what you're doing. Those are all key things that you don't get with a blueprint. And then it allows you a way out if while you're applying this, you run into a conflict. So this is something where one consultant that I work with came up with as a pro to a map that I think is it is a benefit if you're working with multiple developers and you're not sure if somebody made a change to something since the last time you created a blueprint. So if you're worried about something that could have happened and you're going to overwrite something, a map is a way that you can apply it and validate that you're not overwriting something that you're not supposed to or somebody else's code. I feel like personally that means you don't have good control on what's going on in your system, and that's another problem that needs to be solved. But a map, if you're unsure, can give you that way out. So then what is a blueprint?
Greg, we had a question that just came in. Maybe we could do that between slides here.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, right, it was more of just a comment, but here, one did pop up. What processes do you use to ensure that you capture all changes in a map?
So that's a great question, and one of the cons that I feel that there are two maps, and we're kind of going to summarize some of that here too, but I'll cover that here real quick. Personally, I always have, whether it's a notepad or Excel or something open. I use notepad just because it's on every computer and I always have access to it. I always have a notepad open, and if I've made change to a business object, a form, a relationship, whatever it is, I always put it into that notepad file so I know that it's been touched. You have a couple of other options. You could always go back through the blueprints that you've published over time and go and do blueprint changes and see what's in them and compile a total list when you're done. But that is part of what's problematic with using a map for development, maybe is a better way to word it. But you have to build that map when you're done, and then you have to test that map to make sure that you've applied everything properly to the map itself, not just have kind of the test that you have to do in general too. So there is a lot of work that can go into that, but if you're diligent with keeping track of what changes have been made, that's the great pro of using a map, is you can go through and just build it when you're done and include the information that you want. There are some other things with making sure that you have the references available and other pieces to that. But personally, I just make sure as a developer, I always have a notepad open and keep track of the changes that I made. Can maps be developed in one version of Cherwell and published in a different version? Yes, they can. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they will always be able to happen without issue. So the version that's being published, there are steps that sometimes you have to go through to make that work. Sometimes it does just work. Keeping track of one steps and expressions that changed is very important. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge piece of making sure that you're following through and documenting what you're doing for a map. And documentation is key if you're going to build a map. You have to document everything that you do. So, all right, I'll jump into the blueprint piece, and then we'll kind of have a summary of the both. So, so what is a blueprint? A blueprint is the standard way that Cherwell's always had to move changes in an environment. So it's a package. It is a snapshot in time. This is what the system looks like right now for the business objects I touched. Developers can work in separate business objects, but not in the same business object. So what I have done in the past with some large companies is make sure that I build a blueprint or I build my blueprints for a release in series. So what I do, I would often have a date and then a number and my initials. And then every developer would have the date, the number, the initials. But every developer will always work in separate business objects, and we made sure of that. If you have any cross in between business objects, a blueprint has to be closed, and you have to start a new blueprint. So that is where you can run into layers where all of a sudden, depending on the amount of information you're releasing into production, you could have a large number of blueprints if you follow that process properly. But if you follow that process, it will always work, and you don't have to be as diligent of keeping track of every change that's always made in the environments. So I personally like this method and use this method, but a lot of times as a consultant, I'm either the only one making the changes or I'm working with someone one-on-one, and I can have them work in a different area while I take something else. So that's typically the method that I prefer to go through. It is a process that personally I have used a lot, and I feel it's fairly straightforward. But in the end, I think either one is a good option. So I'm going to actually kind of start over on this statement here. So I went off there. So personally, I stick to having blueprints and going through the naming with the dates. Using a map to move development functionality is common. I think it's becoming more and more common. More people recommend it. Development can be done on a single environment and keeping that checklist to make sure that the changes are made. When all development is complete, you do have to go through that testing phase that I mentioned earlier. So I would refresh the environment that you're working in. I would reapply the map and verify that you've got everything and that nothing was missed in your documentation steps. Personally, I think that all you do, I like maps, and I think that the right answer is actually dependent on what you're doing and each individual scenario. Depends on how many developers are working on a certain thing. It depends on if developers have to work on the same business objects. And I think it depends on, are you applying full functionality of something that's been developed for 2-3 months or functionality of something that's been done in a week. I think there's a lot of back and forth, and you can go back and forth on which one is best. But in the end, the one thing I want to make sure that everybody understands is a map is really just a blueprint. You just have some extra steps that you go through ahead of time. So you're using a blueprint either way, and I think that both processes can be beneficial. So now I'm going to run through the questions quick. I think I missed a few, so I'm going to have to go back and figure out where we're at here. Okay, so can maps be developed on, we talked about that one. All right, keeping track of one steps is good. You cannot create a map in 9.2 and apply it to 9.1 or lower version. Reusing blueprints. So reusing blueprints is something that is a good question. So So I'm gonna restate that. Reusing blueprints, publish, reopen, add changes, and publish again how many times? There isn't a for sure concrete answer, or if there is a concrete answer, it would be until somebody else touches something that you're working with, because that would then overwrite their data, so you can't do that. I personally do reuse blueprints a lot, and I will build one blueprint and keep using that blueprint. I've done it for a couple of weeks working in it daily. I have heard of some instances where people have run into issues with that. So to proactively kind of avoid anything with that, I often will save a copy of my blueprint off to a system like Dropbox or whatever it may be. Just so that I've got a backup of, something that was good, say yesterday or whenever it was. But I do like to reuse blueprints and will commonly reuse blueprints. As far as saying that that's best practice, that probably is hard to do. But personally, I've had success with that. So I don't see a problem with doing it as long as you are not overriding something that somebody else is doing. If I published a map a couple of months ago but never used it and want to back it out, is there anything to be wary of? Yes, unfortunately. So I don't have a good answer for removing maps per se. I would typically go through and maybe delete the business object that was the primary business object and leave maybe all of the other little things. But that's one, if you don't back out the map right away, that is one issue of applying a bunch of maps to an environment that maybe you're not sure you're going to keep, and that's why I would do that always in a dev or test environment first. If you've already moved them into prod and you know that you don't want them anymore, I'd probably delete the primary business object and leave everything else, just so that you have gotten rid of the main piece. But I think I'd be worried that some of the pieces that it may touch could be something that is used by other business objects, and that's where you run into the issue of something that's already been in there for a number of months, and then you're trying to back it out. When you republish a blueprint, does it replace the rollback blueprint? That's a good question. I always delete my rollback blueprint and create a new one. I thought I heard that it does not. I don't know if anybody else knows that on the call. I thought I heard that it did not replace the rollback blueprint. Yeah, somebody else said
If
does
you do
not.
have the answer, feel free to pop it in the questions pane there.
I know that I've always deleted the rollback and that therefore created a new one. And that is probably why I got into that habit. So, yeah, you can, I would be cautious with the rollbacks. I personally think I would reapply a new rollback for each time you're going through the publish. So I'm trying to think of the right way to word this so I don't misword it for everybody. I don't want to get this in the wrong statement here. I use rollbacks only usually when I'm moving code into production. I don't usually use rollbacks when I'm going through something in a development environment. I usually just fix whatever it is I was doing in development. My purpose of a rollback is, hey, I moved this into prod. We ran into an issue that we didn't see in test. I need to roll back. That's the purpose that I typically use rollbacks. I don't do a lot of rollbacks during development back and forth with what I'm working with. Personal preference, that's how I use it. Not sure how everybody else likes to use it, but that's what I would recommend. Each time you publish. Since you can't publish the same map blueprint over another, you have to roll back first anytime you reapply a map, rather than a modified map blueprint over a previous version of a map. Okay. All right, so any other questions on maps versus blueprints? And then I have one other topic. All right, I'll jump into the next topic. And again, like I said, when we're done, we'll probably have a question and answer as well. If I get back into the slideshow. All right, so last, utilizing incident subcategory to drive workflow. So this is a great one for a developer. I use the subcategory table for almost everything whenever possible. I absolutely love it. I think it's a great, useful tool for any developer. You can gain value from Cherwell automation, reduce end user decision points, points of process failure, and you can drive the targeted user experience. And these are the primary goals of what we'll talk about. But how you can gain value from Cherwell automation. I've used approval options while going through on the subcategory. So one thing is to build your approvals for, say, a phase 1 approval, a phase 2 approval, and a phase 3 approval. And then on your subcategory, specify which approval for phase 1, which approval for phase 2, and which approval for phase 3. And then based on each subcategory, you can have a different approval process all built out and automated. They can be built from your subcategory instead of having to manually build them for each service. Service catalog, templates, and work units. This one isn't technically on the subcategory business object, but it's driven by the subcategory. You'll specify them in your template, but I like to call that out and just mention that that's used based on the subcategory. Custom escalations. We can build out custom escalations based on which subcategory is selected. And then you can also have pre and post actions based on which subcategory is selected, then going through the save actions. And then on this next one, I talked about driving a target user experience. And again, these are all kind of similar, same things, but broken out into two different areas on how they're affected. But now on the subcategory table, I took a screenshot of the out-of-box subcategory table here. I think this is on 9.2. It has changed here and there based on what version you're on. Might look a little bit different, but they do some of the same things out of box that we've been doing for years now, like the specifics name and going through and default team and some of these other things that weren't always on originally in the first versions of Cherwell, and they've gotten added to the tool out of box. But we do some of the other things that maybe are added that aren't showing on this out of box one anymore are portal names. We love to redesign the service category and subcategory names for how they're displayed to the end user, and then just choosing the different field for the name from the service catalog widget. And then portal actions. So a lot of times based on what subcategory is selected, maybe we want to have different actions that can be triggered or available to the end user to trigger from the portal on. And what we'll do is add a tab that has that option. Default values for the ticket. Anytime you're going to put a default value on the ticket, a lot of times you can drive that from this subcategory. So you can see out of box, we already have default team, escalation teams, and some of the other basic things that you can just drive data from the ticket or autofill ticket if it's defaulted based on what subcategory is selected. And then another use for these, custom notifications. So maybe you have a certain subcategory that you know you're going to have notifications that are triggered or set. A lot of times we'll use the subcategory to do that as well. I think that covers.
Can this be done for change request also?
So it can be done for change request. You're just doing it on a different table. Yep.
And then another question, is there a web link with videos or steps on examples of what maps exactly are, how to create them and use them?
Cherwell has those for sure. Yeah, I know Cherwell has for sure the videos in their video help library that are good. I'm not sure. I know I've heard that there are some other videos out on YouTube. I don't have any ones that I'd recommend or say I've walked through or know about. So
okay.
I would probably look at the video. I would probably look at the video learning library if you have access to that personally.
I think that's a good suggestion. Okay, that wraps up our questions we have right now.
Okay, so that I think is it for the subcategory piece. I think the point to make here is that anytime you want to drive anything or start any work on the ticket, I would drive it from where possible from the subcategory. Another common one is from the service, but or even the CI. But I think the subcategory is a good starting point for, I'd say, 90% of our customers. And that is actually the end here of my presentation. So if we want to open this up for questions and answers, Laura, or I think we've had discussions in the past
Yeah,
from
let's do
customers.
that. So the last thing we like to finish up with these advanced practitioner calls we do is to open up for any and all questions. So it doesn't have to be related to any of the topics we've talked on today. If you have any issues you're trying to solve, any pressing questions that you want to bounce off an expert, now is the time to do that, and we can leave the lines open for quite a while to answer any and all questions you may have. So feel free to pop those questions in. You could also use the raise your hand functionality if you'd like to be unmuted. So feel free to do that. I'll try to watch for those hands to go up if you'd like to be unmuted and have to pay.
Sure.
So,
One question just came in. Do you have any examples of portals? I do. If you want to send an email to Laura, she has a PowerPoint slide that I've sent out to customers when they're asking for examples. So I think we should probably keep that on request, maybe, and we can go through some of the different ones that we have.
okay, and GoToWebinar does keep track of everyone's questions. So Heather, I will be able to locate your email and get those portal examples up to you. All right, a couple questions coming in. Do you want me to read them to you, Greg, or do you want to read and go through?
I can go ahead and go through them if they're just coming in this
Okay.
way. I know your voice is
Fighting it back off. Thank you.
Do you have any examples of a subcategory form that actually shows the things that you just mentioned that you can add to the subcategory table? I know we have examples. I need to verify whether or not we can share them. That might be another one that we'll go through Laura here quick. I do have examples, but personally, I need to verify that we can release that. But it would just be primarily fields that show the items that we have added to that table. So a lot of the functionality after that would be based on save actions or automatic actions. So, from a benefit perspective, it's probably when we send out the slides, just maybe to take the list of other things that we've mentioned that have happened, and these are just the ones that, I got a couple of consultants together for a 15-minute call, and we just kind of brainstormed on stuff that we had done, just to put together the slide. So, there's more I'm sure that we can do with that, and I bet, and I'm kind of curious actually if anybody has anything else that we didn't talk about that they've done. It'd be great to hear or see if anybody wants to chime in with that, because I feel like personally that's a great spot to really drive the ticket workflow. Do you have, or wait, did I missed one here? One sec. All right, can we replicate this catalog widget interface to a knowledge base as well and offer a structured tree view of the knowledge base? I have not tried to do that. However, it is just a catalog widget that looks at tables. So if you were to point it to the knowledge table, you might be able to make that work. But there would probably have to be some testing. I don't feel comfortable just saying yes without having a chance to really look at that. But I do think, because if you were to go back and look at that catalog widget, you can just choose different tables. I don't see why you couldn't maybe build out a different relationship and choose different tables to knowledge. But I have not done that. I haven't seen anybody do that. Neat idea though, actually. Do you have common practices for processing new hire requests? We do, sort of. However, every new hire request for every customer always seems to be different. There is an out-of-box one-step that I've used before in a one-step branching demo or presentation that I've done that I think is a good starting point to maybe talk through everything. So I would look for that if you're trying to come up with a starting point and work from there. So that would kind of walk through the process of creating a new hire request. For your self-service portal, do you have customers that design their portal based on dashboards and not the service catalog functionality? I do. And in fact, I was a person who pushed that very strongly at a couple of large organizations. The one thing that I would make sure we clarify on that is when you do that, you need to make sure that you have the staff available to be able to go through those one steps as needed to make changes that have to happen to the catalog. You will have, I personally believe that Cherwell's service catalog, if you go through just a dashboard like that, can be the most powerful one available. But there's definitely a level of work that's needed from an admin if that's the case. But yes, you could just create hyperlinks and build out your own service catalog on a dashboard and have control over everything. How do you suggest we layer our catalog when more than one department uses it? For example, IT, HR, premises. I would either look at layering something that works for everyone, or I would present different catalogs. So there's no reason we couldn't have a different catalog on a different page for that person. If you can share it, I'd also like to see examples of the subcategory as well. Okay, so that'll be Laura. And then, is there a map or are there customers that have implemented a schedule and appointment workflow through the portal, running into issues with disabling times that have already been booked to eliminate double booking? That does sound like something I've seen before in a map, and I'm trying. Laura, are you familiar with one that would do that? There's got to be. Would that be?
The schedule appointment?
Yeah, schedule appointment. That would the facilities map work for a manner like that?
I'll have to do a little research. Let's check it out and get back to that person.
Yeah, that one might be one where you could reuse the facilities map kind of in a manner for that, but I'm not 100% sure. You may want to look at something else. When cleaning up services or removing some, we found that you have to remove them in order that they are entered in the table, or can leave behind null values. I think maybe you want to take a look at how to retire a service versus cleaning it up, and then making it your widget not view retired services might be the way that I would look at that. Have you ever cloned a specific example? One team enters data into a specific, and then a new ticket is created for another team, and they also need to complete a step in the specific. Reuse the specific across multiple tickets. I would probably use tasks to do that. So I would have a parent ticket and then a bunch of child tasks, if I'm understanding that. If we need further clarification on that, maybe reach out to Laura and we could set up a one-off on that. But I would probably take a look at having tasks with a parent ticket. We're going to be putting primary CI on the subcategory. I like that. Advantages of using service catalog templates versus quick actions. So they're different. They are different options. So the service catalog templates really give you that option to have tasks that are triggered through the work units right from the service catalog template. And I think you can build out the workflow very easily from there. The quick actions I look at as more of I need to do something, trigger a one step, and then be done with the process. So I probably would say that the service catalog templates are more robust from a starting point with workflow, but the quick actions is your easy one way out of, hey, I just need to trigger a one step and I can do whatever I want. Both can be very powerful. And I would probably say it depends on, one, how you're going to present it to the user, or two, what you're trying to do. I mean, I could probably go either way. There's probably mean, when you can get into a one-step, you can do just about anything. So both of them can be very powerful. But the service catalog templates are very useful driving workflow from your service catalog. So I'd probably say that that's the out-of-box method, and maybe the one that I would try to drive more often than not. The quick actions, the nice thing with that is that those could be available and vary based on user selection, maybe a little bit more. So I'd probably use them that way. Maybe that'd be a better answer. Do you recommend changing subcategory management from group maps to table management? 100%. I would get away from the group map as soon as possible. Personally, it's a legacy way of doing it. You have a lot more, you have a lot less control. You're more restricted. So yeah, as soon as you can, I would probably try to move to that subcategory management. There is a personal processing map in the map exchange for the person that asked. Sounds like that might solve for the scheduling, I think, Matt. You might want to take a look at that. And then bit more technical question. Do you know if it's possible to require a join reason to be specified when creating relationships between items, i.e. in which the user can't cancel out of the join reason pop-up, or it doesn't go ahead and create the relationship if the user does cancel from the pop-up? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure how you would require the join reason walking through that. However, I don't want to say that it can't be done, because I really need to dig into Cherwell and just take a look quick. So that might be something we could have a follow-up discussion on or run through. Yeah, off the top of my head, I'm not sure how you would validate that against the join reason, but require, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. Are you asking for a join reason based on the relationship, or are you asking for a join reason on the ticket? If it's based off the relationship, I'm not sure how you would do that. If it's something that you're just prompting them to enter a join reason, we can easily do that. So I think my answer is it depends based on whether or not I understand your question. Sorry.
We did get a thanks from him, so hopefully that did answer the question.
Okay. All right, and that was the last one we've got on here. So I don't know, Laura, if you got any other ones somewhere else, or if anybody has anything else, or if we have anybody else that wants to talk quick.
I do see some hands raised, so I'm going to go one by one and unmute the people who have their hands raised so that you can visit with Greg. So Dennis Smith, you're the first one I see with a hand raised here. Dennis, you're unmuted. If you'd like to talk to Greg, you may do so now. Dennis, we don't hear you. If you'd like to visit, check your mute options. We've unmuted you, but you may need to unmute yourself on your side as well.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
That's it.
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, my question's already been answered through some other answering of different questions. Okay. So thanks.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, let me go to the next hand raised here.
Those are the easy questions.
Okay. I see Gino just raised hand. Okay. Gino, you are unmuted if you'd like to speak to Greg.
Yeah, we're actually looking for an easy way to restrict the ability to request a certain request, even though it's published in the service catalog. We've found ways to do it by putting a hidden value or a hidden object on the form and putting a specific specifier in there. But is there an easier way to do that? We're trying to work with teams and work groups, like the actual work group part of it, and pull from the customer table. But it looks like we can only pull from the user table to restrict submitting requests. Sorry, pull from, yeah.
No, that's, I'm just thinking about that. I wonder off the top of my head if you could go to the security group for the portal customer, and I'm assuming obviously you have a role for each different customer, and then go onto the table and filter the data. Have a inclusion, say, so on each subcategory, have some sort of a flag that says available for certain teams, and then you could check for those check boxes or teams, however you do it, and then filter the data on the security group then. That's just roughly off the top of my head, but that would be, then you could just go on to a subcategory and say, I want it available for this team, and this team.
I can try that.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, let me find the next hand that was raised. Give me a moment here.
There was a question on,
right.
Is there a new way to do this in Cherwell for the specifics? Yeah, it is through the subcategory. I'm going to go back a slide real quick. So on this slide here on the right-hand side, you can see that that's the new subcategory table. And underneath the specifics name in the drop-down, you can select what specifics you want to use instead of using the group map. I am not sure what version that was added in out of box. We've been doing it kind of as a customization as a partner for a long time. But I remember actually Don Lacoste showing me that in my training way back on like early version 4. So it has been around for a while, but it hasn't been implemented in production out of box until I don't know what version recently. It was semi-recently in the last year or two. We use the customer portal group for that. Yeah, I would agree with Brandy, but I think you're probably looking for a little bit more specifics on that with the checkboxes on the subcategory, it sounded like, or some sort of way to flag which teams are available and not available. Have you come across any customer who did some kind of user profiling to present focused service catalog data and portal? I haven't yet, but I have heard that has happened. So, I mean, I just haven't personally gone through it, I guess. Or is that the same for everyone? I think that's kind of what we're talking about, though, with the being able to go through and specify, hey, make this catalog option visible for this team and this catalog option visible for this team. So I think, I know that this is spitballing something just from a development, but similar to visible to customer and portal, maybe visible to IT team, visible to business team, visible to management team, whatever your teams are. And then, so have those visible checkboxes. And then on your security group, go select the security group for each one of those, because each one would have to have their own different security group. And then filter the subcategory based on the selected checkboxes, whether or not it's visible in your group. And that would be a way to, I guess, only show the data that is visible to them. You might be able to do it also, and I'd have to check on that, but you might be able to do it too from the service catalog widget as well on the filtering there, but I'd have to look into that a little bit. So, all right, sorry, Laura, I kind of cut you off there and grabbed the questions that came up.
No problem. So I do see a hand raised from someone named Pamela. Pamela, I don't see that you're connected to audio, so I'm not able to unmute you right now. If you want to get connected to audio, I will come right back to you. Let's bounce down to Paul Connors. Paul, if you still have a question for Greg, you are unmuted. You can speak at any time.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is a great webinar, and ask the question, is this going to be available to like review later?
Yes, I can give you the slide deck if you'd like, and we do upload the recordings to our website. It can take a few business days, but we will send out an email with a link to the recordings. You can view it as many times as you like.
Oh, that's great. And do you have any like previous ones that you can also view?
Absolutely, we do. I keep a track of all those, so let me make a note. Send those your way. here. I will email those over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, this is the first one I've actually attended by you guys, and it was very informative.
Absolutely. We're happy to share those. I'll get those your way after the call.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
You got another one in the questions.
Yep, I've got to remute. Okay, we got him remuted. Well, Marcus had his hand up for a little bit, so let's take a question. Marcus, you had your hand up. If you'd like to talk to Greg, you are now unmuted.
Actually, I got my question answered through other slides and other comments.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Let me page up to see if there's any other hands. We have Charles Fox. Charles, you can speak to Greg. You are unmuted.
Oh, I got my question answered, but I do appreciate the time and the display. If you guys could send me a copy of those portal demos, I wouldn't mind seeing those myself.
Sure, let me make a note on that. While I make that note, Greg, if you saw another question come in, feel free to grab that question. You want to make a quick note for Charles?
Sandy said me too as well on the portal, I think. And although I guess I'm not sure.
Everyone who's chimed in, me too, I would be more than happy to
display Laura's contact info. I can definitely do that. There you go. So anybody who has a specific question on whether or not you want the service catalog or the demo for this demo in video versus the presentation slides versus the examples, maybe take note of the email here. That might be the easiest way. Obviously, Laura's already got a few, but and we'll try to get the ones we can, but it might be easier to just send her an email with what you want.
And I'm seeing a lot of people chiming in that they'd like the information. So why don't I do this? As a follow-up to this call, I'll send out the recording of this presentation, Greg's slides from this presentation, and the portal examples, as well as all of the previous links to previous AP calls that we've done, so everyone will have everything.
Yeah, the one that I'll have to verify on is the subcategory table examples, because I've never actually asked a customer. I've got permission from customers to use the other stuff.
Absolutely.
I can send you mine when I email Laura here if you're interested.
Yeah, that might be a good example. Anybody who's willing to share and they've done some of the stuff that we've discussed. I know some of the customers that I've worked with are even on this call, so feel free.
I don't see any other hands raised, so if there are any final questions, now is definitely the time to ask those before we end our call. I would like to ask the audience too, for future events coming up, if you have topics you'd like to see our consultants talk on and have the group address, please put those, you can email them to me, you can put them in the questions pane, the chat pane, wherever you'd like to put them. I'd love to hear any ideas of things that you'd like to dig into and topics that we can present throughout the rest of the year. So feel free to send those my way, pop them into questions. We want to see what you're interested in hearing about as well.
That helps Kim and I and whoever else does them nowadays prepare, because we have to come up with topics and sometimes we're not sure what to talk about.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so we'll close. I will leave the questions pane open for 5 or 10 minutes. So if you think of topics you'd like to see, feel free to pop those in. That should be open to you for the next 10 minutes. We hope to have our next one sometime in June, so keep a lookout for that. And hopefully within the week, we will have the slide deck and the recording already uploaded for you to share. And feel free to share that with your team. Again, reach out to us at any time if we can ever help with Cherwell initiatives. We hope to see you on our next meeting. Thanks so much for your time today, Greg.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.